In the northern hills where the mist never lifts, there is a place the maps forgot. A village half swallowed by trees that breathe with secrets and moss that remembers the blood beneath it. The sun rarely touches the soil there. The sky remains a sallow, pale gray, even in the height of summer, and the wind whistles through the crooked branches like it's warning something to stay asleep. They don't speak loudly in that village. Doors are closed before twilight. Children aren't allowed to hum lullabies past dusk. And the forest, oh the forest, they never name it. To name something gives it power. And the villagers know well what power costs. It said, though never directly, that once there was a girl who was born with too much fire in her heart and too little fear in her bones. A girl who belonged to the wrong bloodline at the wrong time, in a place that feared what it could not control. She did not scream when they bound her. She did not beg when they dug the pit. Her eyes were dry as they dropped her in, hands tied, mouth sewn with black thread soaked in iron and brine. The curse was old, spoken in the dialect of witches long buried under root and stone. It was meant to keep her still, keep her silent, keep her gone. They poured salt over her, buried iron nails around her limbs, chanted in cracked voices while the earth swallowed her inch by inch. They said it was to cleanse her soul. But none of them dared return to the grave, not even to mark it, not even to be sure. Years passed, then decades, and the story faded like smoke through tree limbs. A tale told in shivers, passed between old women with clouded eyes and cracked rosaries. A warning disguised as a ghost story. A whisper shared behind closed curtains when the wind howled too long, too low. Mothers would hush their daughters with it. Don't talk too loud, don't stray too far, don't grow too wild. But the forest never forgot. And the earth never kept her. Sometimes in the dead of night, when the fog curls low and thick like breath on skin, a sound rises from the woods, a heartbeat. Slow. What? Alive. Because they buried her with a curse. But she didn't stay buried. Niraya was born beneath a blood moon, alone in a hut that smelled of damp herbs and scorched feathers. Her mother died before anyone could hear her name, the midwife swearing the baby clawed her way out without a single cry. They wrapped the child in a shroud of silence and suspicion, and no one claimed her after. The elders said she should have been left outside for the forest to take. Let the trees decide, they muttered. But the priest's wife took pity and raised her under a roof where love was rationed like winter grain. She grew like a vine, quiet at first, always watching, always listening. But there was fire in her bones, slow burning and strange, the kind that made animals freeze when she passed and children bite their tongues when they meant to tease her. She didn't speak often, but when she did, her voice carried the weight of things unsaid, things older than words. By the time Niraya was 9, she could charm the fever from a child's brow with a touch of her fingers and make dead plants rise green again if she wept beside them. Crows began to follow her like a shadow stitched into the sky. People claimed she whispered to them that they whispered back. She gathered herbs no one else dared touch, moonroot, widow's fern, ironflower, and she never needed to check a book to know what they meant or how to use them. She was a healer, yes, but not the safe kind. She'd speak to trees like old friends. Once, she laid a broken sparrow at the foot of the forest and asked the roots to carry it home. The next morning, the bird flew past her window with 3 black feathers tucked under its wing. The village saw these things and did not cheer. They averted their eyes, crossed themselves, whispered old prayers when she walked by barefoot, mud up to her ankles and moss in her hair like a crown. No one ever told her where she came from. But Niraya knew. She could feel it in her blood. In the way the wind always moved around her like it had a secret to tell. In the way fire never burned her palms, no matter how long she held it. In the dreams that came every time the moon turned dark, a woman's voice, half-sung, calling her by name she didn't yet understand. The priest called it devil work. The baker's wife swore her bread soured whenever Niraya passed by. Children were warned not to speak to her, and if they did, their parents scrubbed their tongues with ash and salt. Yet when they were sick, when fever struck or bones broke, it was Niraya they sent for in the dead of night, cloaked in hoods, hiding their desperation behind fear. She always came. Always helped. Never asked for coin. But help, they said, was a trick too. A snare. A spell in disguise. The only company she kept willingly were crows, foxes, and the trees. They never lied to her. Never judged. The forest opened for her like a mother lifting her arms, and sometimes Niraya wondered if that was her true mother after all. If bark and bone were her lineage. If magic was not something she learned, but something that had always been asleep inside her, waiting to stretch. One night, while foraging near the base of the hill where the earth grew red and sharp with old iron, she found a mark carved into a tree. A spiral with lines like teeth. The moment she touched it, her vision blurred, her fingers burned cold, and a voice rasped through the leaves, "You were never theirs." From that day the village fear grew louder. They claimed her shadow moved when she stood still, that she was too pale in moonlight, that her eyes glowed when she turned her back. But Niraya didn't flinch. She didn't run. She had fire, too much of it, and it danced behind her ribs like it was waiting for the day it could finally burn. She knew something they didn't. The land loved her. The forest had chosen her. And blood, no matter how far removed, always finds its way home. It began with a child's scream that split the fog just before dawn. A boy, Ghanian, barely 7, the blacksmith's son, was found pale and stiff in his cot, eyes wide open, mouth frozen in a silent cry. There were no wounds, no blood, no marks of sickness. Just frost on his lips and a strange smell in the air, like burnt sage and iron. The healer said it was the work of spirits. The priest said it was punishment. The boy's mother didn't speak, only wailed into her sleeves until her voice cracked like old timber. But it was the crone, Marith, who uttered Niraya's name first. And once it was said aloud, the village could not unsay it. She was seen near the boy's house just yesterday, someone claimed. She gave him a charm for sleep, whispered another. She's cursed, spat the butcher. She walks in shadow. They gathered like storm clouds, tight, gray, angry, not looking for truth, only someone to bleed. For years they had feared her, used her, relied on her, hated her. Now they had the excuse they craved. Her strange eyes, her midnight wanderings, the way animals followed her, none of it had ever sat right with them. Ghanian's death was not a tragedy to them. It was fuel. By midday they were at her door. They didn't knock. They broke it down. Niraya stood calm as they stormed in, her hands still damp with river water and marigold petals. She had been preparing balm for the cobbler's limp-legged daughter, whose mother now stood with a stone in her hand and rage in her eyes. No one listened as Niraya asked what they were doing. No one answered when she said she hadn't left the forest's edge in 2 nights. The priest called her a deceiver, the devil's whore. They bound her hands in thorn rope, her wrists bleeding before they reached the chapel. Children threw soil at her feet. Elders spat on her hem. A man she'd once saved from lung fever cursed her name as if his life had never touched hers. The trial was a farce. A performance. They read from a book older than the stones in the graveyard, a passage about unnatural women and purging flames. When she tried to speak, a hand struck her cheek. The baker swore her bread had soured again. The shepherd said his goats refused to drink when Niraya passed. They stacked fear like kindling and called it proof. No one spoke in her defense. Even the priest's wife, who once wept over Niraya's touch as it cooled her fevered son, stayed silent in the front pew, eyes on the floor. She has taken a child, the priest thundered. And worse, bound his soul. There was no question of what would be done. Fire, they said at first. But the crone warned fire might release her spirit into the wind. Hanging could leave her ghost in the tree. Drowning could curse the river. So they decided on burial. Bound. Seal. A cleansing ritual they called it. The old way. The right way. At dusk they took her to the edge of the forest, where the land turned gray and sour. It was a place used long ago, when witches were more than rumor, when men still believed they could silence the dark. The ground was already soft there, as if waiting. A hole had been dug, wide enough for a body, narrow enough to suffocate. They laid her down without ceremony. Her mouth was sewn shut with black thread. Her hands tied with iron wire. Salt was poured into the pit, then crushed herbs, wormwood, wolfsbane, thistle, and the ash of sacred scrolls. Nails were hammered around her like compass points, meant to pin her spirit in place. One for her voice. One for her heart. One for each limb. One for her bloodline. The priest spoke the curse himself, trembling as he did. May your soul be still. May your name be forgotten. May your power rot with your flesh. No one cried. No one turned away. As the earth was shoveled over her, Niraya didn't struggle. She looked at the sky, gray and still as ever, and closed her eyes like she was listening for something far away. Her breath slowed. Her chest stopped rising. And when the last shovel of dirt fell, the villagers left in silence, the job done. They thought the curse would hold. That the earth would keep her. That they were safe. But in their haste to bury her, they forgot one truth. Magic doesn't die when it's cursed. It waits. And sometimes when the curse is heavy enough, it feeds. The earth yawned wide like a mouth waiting to swallow something it didn't want. The hole was shallow, but it felt endless from where she lay. Cold seeped into her skin before the soil touched her, creeping like a ghost through her bones. Above, the sky was smudged with dusk, colorless and thin, as if the gods themselves had turned away in shame. The villagers stood in a half-circle around the grave, hoods pulled tight, eyes hidden. Not one of them stepped close. They left that task to the priest and the crone, those who claimed to know the old rites, the forgotten ways. In truth, their hands trembled with every movement, but they covered their fear with ceremony, cloaking cruelty in tradition. Nairea's mouth was sewn shut with thread dipped in iron and blood, boar's blood, thick and sticky, meant to silence sorcery. Her lips cracked as they pulled the final stitch. No one looked into her eyes. They feared what they might see there. Not pleading, not tears, but something worse, defiance. Iron wire bound her wrists and ankles, cutting through skin that did not flinch. Iron is a cage for the spirit, they had said, stronger than fire or stone. She did not struggle as they laid her down. They had taken her voice but not her will. Inside she burned like a coal hidden under ash. Salt came next. White and raw, poured over her chest and feet, packed around her like winter snow. It burned her open wounds. A cleansing, they said. Salt was purity, they said. But Nairea knew better. Salt was memory, it remembered everything it touched. And this salt would remember her pain. They placed 7 iron nails in the dirt around her, each one blessed with a smear of lamb's blood and spit. A nail for her tongue, her womb, her thoughts, her limbs, her name, her rage, her roots. The crone whispered as she pressed each one into the soil, an incantation rasped in a language only the trees still spoke. Bound be the body, still be the soul. Let her rest not in peace but in silence. Then came the chant. The priest raised his arms and began the verse, voice cracking like dry leaves. The villagers joined in, a low drone more fear than faith. The words bled from their mouths, syllables older than they understood. The chant wasn't meant for mercy. It was meant for forgetting. For erasing. For severing Nairea from the world like a weed from the root. Ashes from the temple's oldest scrolls were cast across her chest, scalding her skin with their sacred weight. Marith drew a spiral over her brow with a knife edge soaked in ink and venom, the seal of unmaking, meant to close her sight forever. They didn't pray for her soul. They didn't whisper any goodbyes. No offerings, no coins for the boatman. Just the final command, stay still. Stay gone. Then came the dirt. It hit her like rain at first, soft, broken clumps pattering against her skin. She could feel each grain, cool and heavy, sliding across her cheeks, filling the curve of her throat, slipping into the hollows of her collarbone. She didn't close her eyes. She watched the sky shrink, pale and indifferent, as the world buried her piece by piece. Every handful of earth pressed her farther from the surface. Her breath thinned. Her ribs screamed. Still she did not panic. Stillness was survival now. The last sound she heard was the priest muttering the final line of the curse. May her fire die under stone. May her soul forget its name. Then silence. Total. Absolute. The weight of the soil became a second skin, pressing down until her heartbeat pulsed in her ears louder than any chant. She tried to swallow but her mouth was stitched. She tried to scream but the dirt didn't care. Still, deep beneath the weight something stirred. Not her body, but her blood. Because blood remembers. Blood listens. Blood waits. Her chest moved, barely. Her lungs pulled in air laced with earth and decay. Her heartbeat slowed, yes, but it did not stop. Kept time with the worms, the roots, the thrum of the deep earth. She was buried, yes. But she was not alone. The land knew her. The land cradled her. The land had taken witches before and sometimes it gave them back. The silence was not silence. It was language. It spoke in the shifting of soil, in the stretch of roots curling toward her body, in the ache of old stones that remembered every name forgotten by men. Nairea lay still, eyes closed now, breath shallow as mist. Her heart beat once, twice, slower still. But not stopped. Never stopped. Ask ChatGPT. She dreamed. But not of the things the villagers feared, not of vengeance or screaming spirits clawing their way out of the grave. Nairea's dreams were deeper than memory, older than breath. They bloomed in the dark like mushrooms on rotting wood, slow and luminous, soft on the surface and deadly beneath. She floated through blackness that pulsed like a womb, warm and endless, threaded with voices not spoken in centuries. Her body lay heavy beneath the soil, unmoving. But her spirit, it wandered. In this dark space beyond death, the curse moved like smoke through her veins, wrapping around her soul in spirals and knots. But where the priests meant for it to choke her, to strip her down to ash and silence, Nairea's blood, witch blood, firstborn, feral and unbroken, drank it in. The curse was meant to silence. Her blood twisted it into sound. The curse was meant to still her. Her blood turned it into motion. And in that dreaming dark, something noticed. A flicker at first, like firelight reflected in still water. Then a form. Tall. Half shadow, half bone, crowned in antlers tangled with ivy and crow feathers. Eyes like empty wells. A presence that didn't move, yet was everywhere at once. "You are late," it said, though its mouth did not open. But not lost. Niraya didn't speak, not with stitched lips or waking tongue, but her thoughts shaped themselves into words, sharp and slow like ice forming. "What are you?" "I am what remains." A voice buried in roots. A shape carved in bark. "The first and the last of your kind." The figure reached toward her, not in threat but in recognition. Its fingers were roots, its arms woven with veins of stone and ash. As it touched her brow, she felt everything. The agony of old fire, the howl of witches burned, drowned, broken. Names etched into trees, prayers whispered into the earth, curses bound in blood and sealed with iron. She saw women who had walked barefoot through storms, who had bled willingly into the soil to make the crops grow, who had sung the names of their children into rivers so they would never be forgotten. She saw the graves, unmarked, unholy, of those like her. "You carry us," the spirit said. "You are us." The curse inside her twisted again, writhing like a snake, but now it no longer burned. It flowed. It fed. It became the thread tying her to all that had come before, and all that would come after. "You are the first to survive the old curse," the spirit said, "because you are no longer just a girl." In the stillness beneath the earth, Niraya felt the threads of the curse unwinding, not breaking but reshaping. The salt became sweetness. The iron became warmth. The silence became song. And in that song she heard her own name, not the one the villagers used but the name the trees gave her. A name of root and bone, of fire curled beneath bark. She couldn't remember how to say it, not yet, but she knew it was hers. Her hands began to tingle. Not with pain but power. The spirit stepped back, dissolving into smoke and whispers. "When the moon turns black again you will rise," it said. "But not as what you were." Then it was gone. She fell deeper, not into death, but into becoming. Her heartbeat, which had slowed to the barest flicker, surged once more, pulsing in rhythm with the roots coiled around her body. They did not strangle her. They held her, cradled her, wrapped around her fingers like vines seeking the sun. The earth that had been a coffin now breathed with her. The salt melted into her skin and left no sting. The nails bent inward, drawn to her like iron filings to a lodestone. The stitches in her lips loosened, but she did not speak. Not yet. She was listening. Beneath the grave, the world whispered, soil shifting, worms dreaming, trees murmuring with old words. She heard them all. She was not alive, not dead. Not flesh, not spirit. Something between. Something other. Above her, life carried on. The villagers whispered that the curse had worked. They praised their god for cleansing. They smiled when the fog lifted for a day. But below them, Niraya's body stirred. Not with breath, but with power. The curse was not her prison. It was her seed. It was growing now, blooming inward, shaping her into something they could never have imagined. And when the moon turned black, she would remember her name. And she would rise. The moon hung black in the sky. No glow, no sliver, only a gaping hole where light should be. The forest held its breath. The mist that usually clung low to the ground had risen, threading through branches like ghost veins. Even the owls had gone silent. And beneath the soil, something moved. It began as a twitch, a finger coated in loam and crushed roots, curling inward like it had just remembered how. Then another. Then her foot scraped against the inside wall of her grave, a sound that echoed through the earth like a whisper in a tomb. Niraya stirred. Her eyes opened in total blackness. Dirt pressed in against her lashes, her mouth, her ears. She could taste salt. Something bitter and ancient. Every inch of her body screamed, muscles frozen from cold and pressure. But the pain was far away, like it belonged to someone else. Her bones had become too old for pain, too steeped in the curse to care. Her heart beat. What? Then again. The soil above her began to shift. She clawed upward, hands trembling, nails snapping against stones, each movement a prayer of defiance. Her fingers bled, but she didn't stop. Couldn't. The curse had woven itself into her muscles now, a fire threading through sinew, guiding her limbs like puppets. Her breaths came shallow, choked with soil. She swallowed earth with every gasp, but still she pushed. The grave had been meant to seal her. But they had buried her in dirt, and dirt is alive. Dirt listens. Dirt remembers. And now it yielded. Roots reached down like veins, wrapping around her shoulders, her hips, not to pull her back, but to push her up. As though the forest itself had grown tired of waiting. Her fingers broke the surface just past midnight. The moonless sky greeted her like a birth canal into the world she had been made for. Her hand curled around a clump of moss, dragging herself out inch by inch. Her arms shook. Her shoulders cracked. Her legs barely moved. But her will burned hotter than flesh. She emerged like something reborn, no longer girl, not yet ghost, coated in blood and grave mud, eyes rimmed with black soil and hunger. The cold kissed her skin, and her lungs filled with living air for the first time since the chanting stopped. Above her the trees trembled. Leaves rustled though there was no wind. Crows burst from the canopy all at once, spiraling into the night like a warning flung into the sky. The forest knew. Something old had returned. Niraya staggered to her knees, hands pressed into the dirt like she was thanking it or cursing it, maybe both. Her head tilted back, hair wild, mouth still raw where the stitches had once bound her. For a heartbeat all was still. Then came the scream. It tore from her throat like thunder made of bone. Not pain. Not fear. It was vengeance. It was every silenced woman, every forgotten witch, every buried soul rising in unison through her mouth. The sound cracked through the trees, echoed across the valley, rolled down into the village like a storm come early. Windows rattled. Dogs howled. Infants woke wailing. The villagers sat up in their beds, clutching blankets and crosses, suddenly cold though no wind blew. Niraya stood now, taller than she had ever felt in life, her spine straight, her blood singing. The grave gaped behind her like a wound that would never close. Her feet were bare, caked in the earth that had tried to keep her. She had died. And she had crawled back. The curse had tried to devour her. She devoured it instead. And now she was something else. Something more. And she was not done. The forest opened for her like a womb welcoming something long lost. Branches parted. Fog slithered aside. No path marked the way, yet her feet knew where to go. The grave's cold still clung to her bones, but the trees reached down with leaves like hands, brushing the dirt from her skin. Shadows pooled at her heels, not to trap her, but to follow. She walked deeper than she'd ever dared in life, past the places where hunters laid no snares and birds sang in foreign tongues. Here the trees were older than names, their bark carved with glyphs worn smooth by wind and time. The air was thick with the scent of damp moss, bloodroot and forgotten rituals. Light didn't break here, it bent. Wolves found her first. They circled in silence, yellow eyes gleaming like moonstone. One stepped forward, a scar down its face like a split in the world. It sniffed the air around her, then bowed its head. A moment later the rest followed, pressing their flanks against her legs, their warmth melting the last of the grave's chill. They didn't ask who she was. They already knew. She stayed in a hollow beneath a knotted oak that dripped amber from its bark. She slept beneath stars that didn't appear on any mortal sky. She drank from springs that whispered her name in reverse. Her body healed slowly, flesh knitting, bruises fading, but it wasn't her wounds she cared about. It was her will. She wasn't whole yet, not until she understood what she had become. And so the forest taught her. Crows led her to a circle of stone teeth where the air shimmered with old magic. She spoke aloud for the first time since her burial there, and the ground trembled. Her voice cracked, but it did not bleed. She learned that sound was power. She learned how to pour venom into her words, how to speak a curse in a whisper and a blessing with her breath. She walked through a mirror, an ancient one, silvered with shadow, grown over with ivy. On the other side she met herself not as she was, but as she had been in the before times. Cloaked in starlight, her eyes burning with lineage, her hands already stained with ash. She touched that reflection and emerged not new but remembered. At the roots of a fallen tree she found old sigils, drawn in blood, etched with nails, warnings left by those who had died before her. She lit a fire and burned each one, whispering the names of their casters. The forest watched in silence, and when the flames turned violet she knew their power had passed to her. The curse inside her, once foreign and sharp, had softened now, bent to her will. It lived in her spine like a serpent, coiled and listening. She could summon the chill of the grave with a touch. She could still a heartbeat with a word. But she could also coax a dying flower to bloom, or lull a frightened child to sleep with just her breath. Her magic was not good or evil. It was old. And it was hers. The spirits came next. They didn't speak like the wolves or whisper like the trees. They moved like mist, shaped like memory, women with fire in their eyes and children with bones made of wind. They circled her, sang to her, wept for her. Some touched her skin and left behind marks that glowed in moonlight. Others pressed their foreheads to hers and passed on knowledge without words. Through them she learned what the villagers had tried to erase, her bloodline. She was not just a girl with strange eyes and wild herbs. She was the descendant of women buried without names, of priestesses burned on altars, of midwives drowned for knowing the moment life begins. Her mother had whispered the last of their language into Nairaya's bones before bleeding out onto straw. It hadn't died. It had waited. On the 13th night, when the stars aligned in a shape that had no name, the forest gave her one. Not Nairaya. That name belonged to the girl who cried when the villagers spat at her door. That name lay in the grave she had crawled out of. Her new name was carved into bark by unseen hands. It echoed through roots and rang in the howl of wolves. The crows sang it at dawn and dusk. It meant she who returns. It meant Thorn-eyed. It meant the curse walker. She tasted it in her mouth and smiled. She no longer belonged to the world that had buried her. Now the forest remembered her. And soon the village would too. Ask ChatGPT. The village bells rang that morning, clear and joyful for the first time in months. Smoke curled from chimneys. Bread rose golden in ovens. The mist that had clung to rooftops like damp skin lifted just a little. Children played in the fields without glancing over their shoulders. The witch was dead, they told themselves. The curse had broken. They spoke the words over tea at the well behind market stalls. Balance has returned, the priest said. The forest is quiet again. No more strange birds circling rooftops. No more dreams filled with whispers. No more glimpses of barefoot shadows slipping between trees at dusk. And for a while it seemed true. The blacksmith's hammer rang louder. Goats birthed without complication. The baker's bread didn't sour. The village breathed easier and superstition softened into story. Children were told the tale of Nairaya like a warning, how wildness must be buried, how silence is salvation. But the quiet didn't last. First came the animals. Dogs refused to leave their kennels, growling at corners where nothing moved. Cats disappeared altogether, only tufts of fur left at doorsteps. Then the birds stopped singing. No morning calls. No dusk flights. Just silence. The crops followed. Corn sprouted half-formed. Apples turned to rot on the branch. Rain came too often, then not at all. Wells soured. The scent of mildew clung to everything. And always there were the shadows. They slithered at the edge of lantern light. Moved behind trees even on windless nights. Doors slammed without touch. Windows cracked in their frames. People stopped walking alone after sunset, and the brave ones who did returned pale, shivering, unable to explain what they'd felt breathing down their necks. They wanted to believe it was just bad luck. But deep down, every soul in the village knew. Though no one said it aloud. The forest hadn't gone still. It was watching. And somewhere just beyond the tree line, past the graves they left unmarked, something waited, neither dead nor alive, no longer girl nor ghost. Something that had remembered her name. And would make sure they did too. It began with dreams. One by one, the villagers woke screaming in the middle of the night, soaked in sweat, clutching at their chests as if something had crawled beneath their skin. They spoke of graves cracking open, of fingers clawing through floorboards, of whispering voices chanting in languages no one remembered teaching them. The children were the first to dream of her face, eyes dark as riverbed stone, mouth sewn shut but still humming. She was in my room, whispered Garen's sister, pale and glass-eyed. She stood by the window. She was smiling even though her mouth was closed. No one said her name. Not because they'd forgotten it, but because it burned the tongue. Doors were double-bolted. Fires were lit through the night. The priest led prayer circles in shaking voices, and yet no matter how hard they prayed, the dreams came back. Stronger. Sharper. Her image bled into the edges of waking. People began to see her in reflections. In water, in mirrors, in windows, always just behind them, always watching. And then the storm came. It wasn't heralded by thunder, but by silence. Birds did not fly. The wind did not blow. The sky turned gray as bone, then black as a sealed tomb. The clouds pressed down like a lid. The forest stood still until it didn't. The trees shook. Not from wind, but from something moving through them. The first strike of lightning cracked the chapel bell clean in half. Ash fell from the sky like snow. A bitter, choking rain followed. It coated rooftops in gray sludge and hissed against fire pits. Lanterns refused to stay lit. The village became a smear of shadow, lit only by flashes of red lightning that seemed to burn without sound. And then she stepped through the smoke. She didn't knock. She didn't sneak. She walked straight down the main road, barefoot, mud-streaked, wrapped in a cloak of crow feathers and bramble. The forest moved with her. Wolves loped at her sides. The crows circled above. Her eyes were not those of a girl, but of something deeper, older, flame-fed and grave-born. The people froze. The priest tried to speak, but his tongue stuck to the roof of his mouth. The elders clutched their amulets, but the charms blackened and snapped on their necks. Nairia stopped in the center of the square. Rain hissed off her shoulders. Around her, the air vibrated with power, familiar now, intimate. The curse no longer haunted her. It was her. She turned to face the chapel, where the elders had once gathered to seal her fate. The wooden doors blew open before her. Wind screamed through the pews. Candles blew out, one by one, though no breath touched them. Inside, the priest stood trembling at the altar, flanked by those who had chanted her into the ground. He raised his hands to pray. She raised a finger. And he fell silent, not struck dead, not burned, but emptied. His voice was gone, taken the way they had tried to take hers. He opened his mouth, horrified, but no sound came. He would never speak again. The others tried to flee, but their limbs betrayed them. Their feet stuck to the stone. Their eyes rolled white. Nairia moved between them like smoke, pressing a palm to each chest, whispering not hate, but names. Not curses. Truths. She spoke their sins aloud, one by one, words etched with dirt and blood. The lies they'd buried. The secrets they'd hidden beneath the floorboards. She whispered them into their bones. And once named, those truths clung to them. And the curse spread. Not just to the guilty, but to the cowardly. The ones who stood silent. The ones who closed their eyes and told themselves it wasn't their fault. It infected them like mold and damp wood, slow and irreversible. They began to dream too. Then bleed. Then rot. The curse moved faster than fire, but more quietly. A glance. A word. A memory. That's all it took. Crops blackened overnight. Teeth fell from smiling mouths. Hands blistered at the touch of holy water. Those who tried to run found the forest didn't open for them anymore. Trees twisted into cages. Roots tangled their legs. And Nairia? She didn't stay. She left the square with the same slow grace she arrived with, the storm parting around her like a veil. The wolves disappeared into the trees. The crows scattered like ash on the wind. But she had marked them. And the mark would not fade. Now each night someone new awoke to the feeling of dirt beneath their fingernails. Each night, a window shattered with no wind. Each night, they whispered to each other that it must be over now. But the curse was never a moment. It was a seed. And Nairia had planted it in all of them. They buried her to silence her. But she had returned not with a scream, but with a voice so vast it would echo forever. The forest was quiet again. Not with fear, not with waiting, but with breath. A stillness earned. A stillness full of eyes. Nairia stood on a ridge blanketed in silver moss, overlooking a grove that had no path, no name. Below her, nestled beneath ancient trees that curved like ribs, lay a ring of stones blackened with time and lichen. Each one marked a grave. Not carved. Not blessed. Just a shape in the soil. Women buried here had no names on record, but the wind spoke them when it passed. The roots had not forgotten. She knelt in the center, fingers pressed into the damp earth. "I did what you couldn't," she whispered. But her voice trembled. She wasn't sure if it was pride she felt, or grief. The power still burned in her blood, steady, coiled, waiting. With a thought, she could strike the village again. Reduce it to ash. Curse their fields for 7 generations. Teach every child born from that place to wake crying her name. And part of her wanted to. Because the girl they buried was gone. She was something else now, rebuilt from dirt and curse, stitched back together by roots and rage. Her reflection no longer looked entirely human. Her eyes flickered like ember glow. Her breath smelled faintly of grave soil. She could summon wolves with a sigh, twist shadows into shapes that watched, and speak to the dead in their own tongue. But power always asks a price. And hers asked more each day. At night she still heard Garen's voice. The child who had died not by her hand, but by fear twisted into blame. She dreamed of the priest's wife, once kind, who had looked away. Of children who ran when she passed, now waking screaming in their beds. She had become the thing they feared. Had she chosen it? Or had they made her into it? She closed her eyes and placed her hands flat on the graves of those who had come before. Witch mothers, root sisters, firewalkers, curse-bearers. They had all walked this path, half human, half story. All had been hunted. Some had forgiven. Others had scorched the world behind them. "What would you have me do?" she asked the earth. And the forest answered, not with words but with wind. It rustled the leaves softly, no fury, no warning. Just a hush like a lullaby. She understood. She could not unmake the curse. But she could choose how it would live. Not as plague, but as warning. As memory. A different kind of monster. One that watched. One that waited. One that protected what no one else dared to love. Peace would not be forgetfulness. It would be fear with a reason. And that was enough. The dawn after the storm was stained with gold. Smoke curled from the chimneys again, cautious and thin, as if unsure it still belonged. No birds sang. No bells rang. The village was hushed, sore, shadowed, altered. Some walked the streets with red-rimmed eyes. Others didn't come out at all. Doors were shut, not in protection but in mourning. For what they had done. For what they had become. Niraya returned one last time, not through the square but through the wind. No footsteps. No voice. Just the sudden quiet of air thick with presence. People felt her before they saw her. She moved through the village like a chill memory, stopping only at certain doors. At the house of the old widow who had once slipped bread beneath Niraya's window. At the stable boy's door. He who had warned her once that the elders whispered in corners. At the home of the mute girl who had touched her hand at the well, saying nothing, but understanding everything. These she spared. She pressed her palm to each threshold and murmured a word older than speech. The kind of word that curved through the bones instead of the ears. A gift and a goodbye. A protection woven of shadow and ash. To the rest she gave silence. A curse more subtle than flame, more enduring than rot. No disease. No plague. No fire. Just forgetting. They would no longer remember the shape of her face, the sound of her name. When they tried to speak of her, their tongues would stumble. When they closed their eyes, her image would blur like smoke. Only those who truly listened, who dug in the dirt, who sang to crows, who heard winds speak in mirrors, only they would know. The rest would invent stories. The girl who vanished. The witch in the woods. The spirit that watches. And that was enough. At the edge of the forest, Niraya stopped. She didn't turn to look back. The village no longer held her name. It had buried it once and now she had buried it in return. The trees opened. The wolves were waiting. The crows whispered in spirals overhead. She stepped into the green dark, her feet silent over fallen leaves, her breath soft as fog. Her hair, longer now, tangled with charms and bones, runes carved from crow beaks, from old teeth, from fragments of herself. Each one whispered a piece of her story. She walked for hours, days, maybe years, time bending in the forest like light through water. She passed through shadowed glades and silver springs, through roots that hummed and stones that bled, until the air shifted again. She'd found her place. A hollow deep beneath a canopy so thick no sun touched it. Flowers grew without light. The earth pulsed like a heartbeat. Here she would sleep. Not in death but in watching. And at night she sang. Not to the village. Not to the dead. But to herself. A lullaby she wasn't supposed to know. One her mother hummed between contractions, blood blooming on straw. A song passed from voice to voice down a line of women too wild for history to hold. The tune carried the weight of fire and silence, of betrayal and rebirth. It echoed through the trees, curling around bark, slipping into roots, brushing against the dreams of the children who might one day wander too far into the woods. A song no one taught, but many remembered. And if you ever followed that song, deep enough, quiet enough, you might find her. A girl with bones braided into her hair. Eyes full of shadow light. Humming a song meant to be forgotten. And watching. Always watching. They warned him, of course. At the tavern, over cloudy glasses of apple mead and hushed, sideways glances. The kind of warning slipped between coughs and half-laughter like they weren't sure if they were joking, or hoping they were. Storm's coming, the old barkeep muttered, polishing a cracked mug with the same gray rag he'd used all night. Best stay inside once the wind starts to moan. The traveler, a man with worn boots and a notebook stuffed with legends, had smiled politely. Another village. Another tale. He'd heard hundreds. Women who turned to owls. Forests that swallowed hunters. Ghost brides dancing in graveyards. All stories told to keep children in bed and tourists spending coin. But this one had teeth. She only sings before the storm, said a woman with thick braids and crow tattoos inked along her fingers. You'll hear her. Clear as anything. Like a lullaby wrapped in smoke. If you do, don't stop. Don't turn. Run. He'd written it down in his notebook. Local myth, the singing witch of the northern woods. Weather omen. Possibly tied to older forest deity lore, check folklore indexes. He camped just outside the tree line that night. It was quiet, Too quiet for the depth of the forest. No insects. No rustling. Just that thick, strange silence that presses on the eardrums. And then he heard it. Oh, sweet, ancient. A voice like wind against bone. Like blood in a cradle. Like something that remembered being buried. She was singing. He froze. The air around him grew heavy, wet with static. His fire sputtered out with a hiss. He couldn't tell which direction the voice came from. It echoed everywhere, inside his skull, inside the trees. He should have run. But instead he reached for his recorder. And that's where they found it. The next morning the village woke to an eerie stillness. No birds. No dogs barking. Just mist hanging heavy like grief. They found blood on the tree trunks. Drag marks in the soil. His tent was untouched. His recorder still ticking beside the cold ashes of the fire. But he was gone. All that remained was his notebook, open to the last page. A single line scrawled hastily in red. She's still singing.